Good evening, this is Brother Bro here, coming to you from the Cannes Film Festival, and it's time to review The Apprentice. And I will also be speculating on its awards prospects. So it was directed by Ali Abbasi, whose credits include Border and Holy Spider. And this marks his first English language film, and also the first film that he hasn't had a writing credit on. The film was written by Gabriel Sherman, who has also written a book on the Fox News president, Roger Ailes. This is yet another piece of his exploration of mega influential conservative figures. Now, what's going on here? What kind of movie is this? Like, what is Sebastian Stan doing? I had so many questions going into this film, and I hope to answer them for you all. The first thing that comes to my mind is, when I hear a film like this, is it Adam McKay? It's not really Adam McKay. This is not a pure comedy. It's not trying to be a romp. Mostly, it's a film that is very serious about exploring Donald Trump and like who he is at the core, but it does have some witty and funny lines throughout that people were chuckling at. Probably could have used even more comedy to bring people into the story more, just because it's the kind of movie that people need to be warmed up to because they're so hostile about Trump in the first place. Like, I think the existence of the movie is making people feel hostile towards it. Like, oh, why do we need this film? Like, is it going to justify its own existence? Does this feel too soon to make a movie about Donald Trump? And in my opinion, this film is justified for existing. Although I have read through some reviews from critics who did not like the film, and the main crux of why critics seem to be underwhelmed by this film is that like they're just not as curious about Trump at this point. It's both that they already know all of these things, all of these dastardly things that he's doing in the film. They're not surprised by the characterization of him as being pretty cold-blooded, which this film makes the case for him to be, or that Trump is just not an interesting enough person to do a biopic on. But really what this film did very well was create sort of a thesis that explains Donald Trump's behavior and how he came to be who he is. And I thought it was very convincing, and it didn't feel like a Democrat-sponsored hit job, that sort of thing, even though it will no doubt be characterized as such because it does come down pretty hard on him and pretty negatively. But really, this is just a story of how people game the system. And there are some stupidly simple ways that, like, oh, if you just throw the book at everybody at every opportunity you get, if you threaten people, if you blackmail people, like, you are going to get very far. The film is about how a young Donald Trump started his real estate business in the 70s and 80s, so it doesn't intersect with the political career at all. And really, this film's thesis revolves around the role of Roy Cohn in his life. And it makes the case that Roy Cohn was this mentor to Donald Trump. Roy Cohn is essentially a lawyer and a political fixer, and he will basically use everything in his power to get what he wants. And so, you know, the film is sort of predictable in that, like, once you have this premise, okay, there's Roy Cohn teaching Donald Trump all these rules about how to become successful in America. Donald Trump adopts those rules, and you could connect it more broadly to American corruption and the way that American politics works in general. So I think this is a valuable subject matter to explore. I don't think this is off limits. It makes a ton of sense to look at this chapter in Donald Trump's life and his relationship with Roy Cohn in order to try to understand him, and I just found the film convincing and quite haunting. The way this film is shot is that it has a very vintage 70s TV look. So it looks like an artifact of the time. They were starting to shoot documentaries in the 70s with like these handheld cameras, you know, following politicians around, and a lot of this footage is handheld. There are some zooms that are utilized really well. I love the lighting here. There's a lot of practical lighting. Many red lamps, like if you can think of the interiors in Goodfellas, you might get a sense for the color palette of this film. I thought this was like the right choice because I think we need to be transported back in time to kind of erase our conception of who Trump is now because it's so intertwined with his political identity. What the film does well is it wants you to start out on kind of a blank slate. The Donald Trump we see in the beginning of this film is not the one that we're totally familiar with. We're kind of getting to know him in a new way, and I think that's very important. And it makes him into this more ordinary person, which, like, before his political career, he was just considered yet another person who is succeeding in the real estate business, and he is probably one of very many people whose behaviors have rewarded him with a great fortune. And as far as how deep we tunnel into Trump's psyche, there's a limit that the film realizes in a self-aware way that it's going to hit, and it like doesn't attempt to prescribe, you know, some like really deep issue, just because I think Trump himself is not very like vulnerable and open about that sort of thing. I like that the film presents this idea that there could be something like deeply psychological embedded within Trump's past, but it doesn't suggest what that is, because I think it fairly enough, you know, you can't really figure it out. You just can't know. And there is a limit into like how deep we can get inside of Trump's brain. But for all the reasons that matter, I think what Roy Cohn and his philosophy and what he represents in America is the relevant piece here, and that's what people should be aware of. The film also has a nice soundtrack. It starts out with some punk rock music over montages of New York to remind you of the place that New York City once was and how it was kind of dingy, especially in the areas that Trump was beginning to build his real estate projects. And, you know, the film's pretty enjoyable overall. It's entertaining enough. I don't think it's going to like lose or bore people. If anything, I absolutely accept the criticism that this film spoon feeds you what it wants you to know and understand. And I think it does lack a little bit of power for that reason. Like, I don't think anyone's going to be coming away from the film thinking that was like a top 10 of the year for them. And there's a limit to how impactful this film really is. I mean, it doesn't take any huge swings. It's not extremely ambitious, but at the same time, it doesn't like go soft on Trump. It does enough. Now let's talk about performances, because I think the best part about this film is Sebastian Stan. There's very much a beginning of the film Donald Trump and an end of the film Donald Trump. And the beginning of the film Donald Trump does resemble the interviews that I've seen of him as a young, like sprouting, you know, real estate mogul. He comes across as much more meek, more timid, just not quite as confident, but has like sort of a quiet, you know, ego about him. Whereas in the end, like, he is Donald Trump. There are a couple scenes in the third act where like Sebastian Stan just seems to like be channeling him and really takes on all of his mannerisms, and suddenly like he just kind of brings him to life in all of the shades that we're familiar with. And it is truly astounding to see, because this is not like a caricature performance. It's far from an SNL skit. You could think about it a little bit as Michael Fassbender's impression in Steve Jobs. He's not trying to capture the voice exactly. He doesn't feel the need to pick up on every single mannerism. But really, I think the smart choice was that he doesn't attempt to do something different with his voice. He uses the voice of Sebastian Stan, but he adopts many of the inflections, his body language, some of the mouth shapes, and those begin to increase as the film goes on. So this performance really impressed me. I thought it was pretty pitch perfect. Now, Jeremy Strong here is in the movie a whole lot, and he is also excellent. He is just totally bronze, and he has like tunnel deep eyes that just seem like both vacant and at times like quite sad and pitiful. And he kind of adopts a voice like this, you know, he talks like this the whole time, kind of in a weird monotone. And I think seems pretty accurate from what I've seen of Ray Cohn interviews. You know, he embodies that like kind of weird but also like desperate psychopath. Maria Bakalova, a little disappointed that she wasn't in the film more, that she didn't have a couple more scenes, but she is sprinkled in it and she is fun, and I really loved her presence and her performance. And those are mainly like the three notable performances. Like there's not really any other character I can think of who stood out too much. Even though I think it was heavy-handed, I liked the screenplay a lot in that it was very witty. There were a lot of memorable lines. Many of them I was like trying to write down in my notes as I was hearing them. And just like Sebastian Stan, you know, the dialogue itself very much channels Donald Trump. I would give this movie an 8. It's probably a light 8, but I think it was overall effective, and I was pleased with the film. Maybe it's the performance from Sebastian Stan that boosted up to an 8 for me, especially just the ending. Like it was very memorable for me to just feel like Donald Trump is actually like coming to life. And I feel like I do understand Donald Trump in a deeper way, and it does make you a little bit more intimately familiar with the kind of challenge we're facing with the fact that this man is facing off in the White House yet again. Anyway, that brings me to the awards conversation here. So this is more interesting than maybe people think it's going to be. It makes sense that critics are mixed on this, but I do want to just tell people that I think the audience is going to like this film more, because being obvious with what you're trying to do does not really disturb an audience. The film is very palatable. It was one of the more mainstream feeling movies I watched at Cannes this year. I don't think it's like overly hostile for people who are a little bit agnostic on Trump. I don't think it feels too aggressively anti-him. I think it feels like it's being fair, even though it ends up feeling like, you know, he's kind of a monster. And certainly people who don't like Trump already will go into the movie and they will feel good that the movie kind of affirms the way that they already see him. People are so crazed about the presidential race in the United States that many people will find this film and go, oh my God, this is so important. Everybody needs to see this. We need to realize what kind of guy he is. Then there's one particularly heinous act that it depicts Trump as having done, and I did look it up, and there's like evidence that this did happen. This is not just some fabrication of the film, and it is something that articles have already started to write about, something that we're going to have to reckon with yet again, even though it feels like this is an exhaustive media cycle where Trump just feels like impenetrable and there's nothing really that can change people's minds. People, you know, may use this film as fuel to try to like shake people awake awake again about like the kind of person he is. But then, you know, the way this stuff works, people who are pro-Trump are just not going to care, and they're going to see this as like a cancel job for him. And I'm gonna bring in a special guest to see if I'm on the right track here, see if he agrees with me about the awards chances. Ladies and gentlemen, Luke Heerfeld.
Hey guys,
wait, how we doing? Well, here, you can pull up this chair.
There we go. Oh, thanks for having me. Not quite the Oscar expert, but hopefully a lovely alternate.
Maybe an apprentice, really.
Yeah. Does that make you Roy Cohn?
Exactly, yeah.
Lovely.
Well, actually, Oscar expert was my Roy Cohn, and I owe him a lot.
There you go.
I owe him all my success. My feeling about The Apprentice is I'm less hot on it being an awards contender than I was going in, because I don't think it's like a critic movie. It's not really like a top 10 movie for most people. However, I'm going to compare this to Vice. Vice is going to be my main comparison here for like, yes, that movie did not perform too well with critics. It had enough of those transforming performances that it did end up getting in and people thought it was important. I'm thinking this is kind of like Vice, minus a director and an editing nomination, especially, and maybe only if Trump wins. Do I think this? If he loses, people are going to be like, we don't need the film because he lost and maybe he's gone. And they're going to be like, forget about it. The film doesn't matter. If he wins, this film's going to matter. And people are going to think that voting for the film means something and it stands for something. It's one of the most important movies. People saying like, oh, it's not a great film. That's different than others who will just think that this film's very important. It's necessary. Then the performances here are very baity. I'm going to keep it low in picture. We'll see what happens. It's a very iffy scenario. I could see it sinking down to 0 nominations, okay? It depends on how the year shakes out. I could see it being Steve Jobs just getting acting nominations, and I could see it being picture and screenplay nominated as well. This was last year? No, this would not have gotten in last year, but like this year is a different beast.
Yeah, just at Cannes, it doesn't feel like we've had as many like, oh, this is going to be in the best picture
and I think
conversation. Most people will check out this film because they want to see if Sebastian Stan sticks the landing, and he absolutely does. Absolutely sort of best acting material. He really does like live in the character, really breathes in the role. Yeah. And Jeremy Strong is also really, really good in this. If he doesn't get into the 5, you know, that I could see a world where that doesn't happen, but I do think he'll be in contention for sure.
I could see critics like snubbing them for acting performances, being like, we don't need to do that. We don't really care about The Apprentice. Yeah. But when it comes to the industry awards, as long as The Apprentice doesn't like fucking die, like it just didn't do anything, it's not at the box office, whatever, then I feel like they're going to pop up. The Apprentice overall could be a sort of enemy for people on Twitter, but like it's just so baity that it kind of needs to be there in some way. It would just be weird if this performance like didn't cause awards chatter and didn't result in nominations. It's just too weird.
The amazing thing about Jeremy Strong for me as well was, I mean, he's a completely unsympathetic person. His actions in this movie are absolutely abhorrent. Him being a closeted gay man and threatening other public figures to out them, you know, when he himself is secretly gay as well.
Really great LGBTQ representation.
I know, yes. A win for us there. He actually managed to nuance some humanity in there. Like,
I think the character goes in a direction that surprises people and like it gives him a little bit of depth that they weren't expecting, and so like he's very much,
it gives him a little extra
in a good position.
Yeah. Bakalova, as good as I thought she was in the movie, I don't think she's going to get much attention. Maybe like Golden Globe nomination or something.
Just too small of a part. If this movie were a top movie in Best Picture, I think she could coattail it, but like I don't think it's going to be that high up.
I mean, makeup and hair feels quite likely. The transformational work they've done on Sebastian Stan is really good. It's very subtle makeup.
And it evolves over the course of the movie.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's not Tammy Faye makeup. There's no prosthetic nose. That could get in, and again, it could be, but it also could be like Spencer with makeup where it just doesn't happen.
My logic is, you know, they do like to pair, you know, performance with makeup often, but we'll see how that goes. Yeah. I'm not so sure about it getting into picture. For me, it's probably like somewhere around the 13, 14, 15 mark. I don't know. Even though I've not seen most films, I'm not as confident on it. I just don't know if it's going to be a lot of people's favorites or in the top 10. So I don't know if it's got the legs to go the distance for Best Picture, but maybe. Do you think they would put it in comedy musical or drama at the Globes?
I think it's a drama.
Yeah? I mean, I think it's more of a drama, but I don't know. Part of me feels like they might hedge their bets and like say, oh no, it's more.
I was pretty confident that it was just going to be a drama. Weird stuff happens in that category.
Yeah,
so
I don't know.
And you know, I would encourage people to look at Letterboxd. If you look there, it's actually like pretty normal looking. Like a lot of people not only like the movie, but they like it a lot. There's actually a decent amount of like 8 out of 10 on Letterboxd. And that's like a strong review. Consider that it's a little bit more of like a populist movie. It does not need to be a critic smash hit. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
Can you totally do your best Donald Trump impression in the comment section below? So it's going to be great. It's going to be huge. It's awesome.
Nice.
That was shit.